Okay.
Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we try to bring you an inspiring message about all kinds of things related to service to others. Our particular focus in our club is education, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and we love to see programs where we have that opportunity to learn how people are making their communities better in all sorts of different ways. So what we're doing today is to actually interview one of our own. We're going to talk with Judge Rory Olsen about work that he's done in the Houston area where he lives. Before we do, I'd like to introduce everybody who is on the recording. I'll start with our northernmost attendee, Roger in Kamloops. Roger, would you introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, I'm Roger Plested, and I'm from Kamloops, British Columbia, and I'm a lawyer. And
and a good man.
Yeah, and it's snowing up here.
I understood. Thank you, Roger. Very cool, and stay warm. And let's see, coming down here, Cecilia, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Cecilia Babkirk, and I live in San Jose, California, not far from Rushton, and it is not snowing here. In fact, it never snows here. It's quite lovely.
we have it good, and our land prices reflect something along those lines.
That's right.
Sviatko, why don't you tell us where you are?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sviatko Shirov, and I'm a director with this club. I am actually currently living in a beach town in Nicaragua called San Juan del Sur. It also doesn't snow here. Sorry, Roger. It's quite warm.
Yeah, I don't think of Nicaragua as a place where there's a lot of snowing going on, for sure. Excellent. And we have a guest. We're very excited to have Bené Tadzo with us. Bené, if you'd introduce yourself real quick.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm really looking forward to the topic this afternoon. My name is Bené Tadzo. I am local in the Bay Area, and I volunteer a lot with different educational organizations. So I'm really interested today. Thank you.
Wonderful to have you. Thank you, Bené. My name is Rushton Hurley. I am the charter president of the club and a member of the board. And I love when our members find all kinds of cool programs to share with others. I also love it when one of our members says, I'd be happy to talk about something, because I contacted Rory fairly recently and said, hey, what about this story that another member of ours, said, this would be a really cool thing to hear more about. And he said, well, if you think people would be interested, that'd be fine. I said, yeah. So we're going to talk to him. I'll start by just having Rory tell a little bit about his position and the duties he has, and then I will interview him, and we will all ask questions as we go. So it's a slight departure from our normal format, but we're excited to learn about Judge Olsen's work. So Rory, tell us a little bit about your position and your duties.
Sure. I'm judge of Probate Court 3. There are 4 probate courts in Harris County, and my court is one of 2 courts that deals with mental illness. That's not all we deal with, but that's what we do. And somebody somewhere in the legislature tagged the court with being the administrative court over mental health. So that makes my position somewhat unique. Of course, we do the usual things with determining who gets the dead person's stuff, if it's a guardianship, do you need a guardianship, and if so, who should serve as the guardian, and lawsuits dealing with the estates of either decedents or wards. So that's what we do.
All right, and so that means that you have both judicial and administrative duties, is that right?
Yes. When the statute was written 30-some years ago, we did roughly 1/3 of the number of mental health cases that we do now. So as the county has grown, the administrative aspect of my job has grown as well.
All right. Now, have you been involved in mental health issues the entire time you've been a judge, or did that become a part of your work after you?
No. Actually, I got involved, and the reason I ran for this particular court was in the middle 1980s. I started doing once or twice a year representing people on the mental health docket. So I had a dozen years of experience before I became a judge. And since doing mental health is one of the integral parts of my job I've been doing as a judge I'm in my 20th year, so it's been a while.
Wow. And I'm sure there's all sorts of interesting things you find in that kind of work. What about that work really kind of sings to you in terms of, not just your expertise, but kind of your heart for helping the community?
Well, the main thing is I got over all the aversions that people would have to the mentally ill when I was a lawyer. You'd go up in the units, you talk to some of the people. Yeah, some of the people were hostile, some of them you couldn't communicate with, but a lot of them were much like everybody else, except they had a mental problem. My favorite one was I talked to a man on a unit once who said he didn't want to fight the commitment because uh, he was a good sailor and he was taught to respect authority. But he asked me if I could get in touch with his commanding officer because since it was time of war, he didn't want to be court-martialed for desertion. So I said, "Oh, you're in the Navy. Then recite the chain of command. Who's the commander-in-chief?" And he snapped to and said, "Sir, the commander-in-chief is the Honorable Harry S. Truman, sir." And I went, "Oh, yeah, it was 1988 when he told me that." So, yeah, he seemed to have a problem. I talked later with the doctors, and whenever times got bad, he went back to the happiest time of his life, which was when he was in the Navy during the Korean War. So, if it weren't for that one quirk, you could talk to him and it'd be just like anybody else. So I have a great respect for the mentally ill. They're not that much different than those of us who are ostensibly sane.
Yeah, so true. And without a doubt, I think a lot of the challenges that come for those with any kind of mental illness comes with how people see options for them, right? As opposed to, I don't want to deal with it, just, like let's hide these people off somewhere, or whatever it might be. And and in truth, there's all kinds of things that we face all the time. My guess is that as families begin to think about these issues, like, okay, we have someone in the family who's having serious issues, related to mental health, and they don't know what to do. Maybe they feel they can't care for the person or anything like that. What are kind of the longer term options where you are? So if a family kind of feels like, okay, here's what we can do for this person, whom we love, but we don't know how to properly care for him or her. What are the options?
Well, the world has changed over the last 40 years. When I was in law school, a case came down from the U.S. Supreme Court called O'Connor versus Donaldson. And in that case, the court dealt with the mental health situation in Florida. And like other states, basically, if you were declared mentally ill, you were going to stay there for a long time, maybe until you died. And the Supreme Court said, no, you have to actually provide therapy, not just warehousing. Well, that was about the time that psychotropic drugs started to become available. So over time, the number of people who spent a long period of time in mental hospitals nationwide declined, and probably very justifiably so. Over time, there were fewer and fewer people in mental hospitals, and with the modern psychotropic drugs, they can be brought back to stability where they can be released, maybe not forever, but at least they need to, they can be out in the community. The problem, however, is sometimes their bodies adjust the medications or the dosage needs to be changed or a different med needs to be provided, or they stop taking the drugs because they don't like the side effects. So those are the main challenges. People can go into a hospital and be stabilized generally within a week to 2 weeks. But then when you let them loose, it's a battle to see if they can keep functioning in society and taking their meds and doing whatever is necessary to keep them from going back in the hospital.
Yeah, and I would imagine that for a lot of people who have mental health issues, and they're going through a tough period, finding a place to be is tricky for all sorts of reasons. But I would assume one of them has to do with just the the number of spots available. I mean, we talk all the time about, do we have enough, beds in hospitals for this kind of concern or this kind of concern or this kind of concern? Is that a part of what you faced in Harris County when it's kind of an issue of like, are there beds for those who need psychiatric care?
Yeah, what happened to us was we had adequate beds for many years. The hospital we have now, Harris County Psychiatric Center, opened in the mid-'80s, and it had enough bed space when it opened up to get people to the point that they could be released back to the community. But as the population grew, you can't expand the hospital or any building by 1/10 or 5% a year. It's more difficult to build a building. So what happened over time was there were people who, on the day they were released, had the capability of being functional, but the functionality didn't last too long. So they kept coming back, and the revolving door kept spinning faster and faster.
Now, I understand that at some point you wrote an article that was in was it in the Houston Chronicle, or was it an article referencing an article in the Houston Chronicle?
No, it was written in the Houston Chronicle. Make a long story short, the state of Texas settled a lawsuit against the mental health authority statewide, and they decided as part of the settlement to divert funds which would have been used for civil commitments and other things to meet the requirements of the settlement of the lawsuit, which was to deal with people who were convicted criminals and suffering from mental illness, which really kicked civil mental health in the pants. So I got together with the powers that be, and we decided the initial thing to do would be to try and get the legislature to next session give us more money. And for those of you who don't know Texas government, in Texas, the legislature meets for 140 days every other year, and they normally go out of session right around Memorial Day. So the lawsuit was settled in August of a year that the ledge had met. So we had to wait for a while, but eventually, through the help of some interested legislators, we got a bill there to give us back the funding that we'd been missing for a year and a half. So as part of my campaign to make sure that the bill was passed, I went around and I approached people in the news media, and the Houston Chronicle was going to be doing a Sunday supplement dealing with mental health. And it was just, they'd picked it, and I called at the right time. So I wrote an article which talked about why we need more funding for mental health in Harris County. And one of the things I mentioned towards the end of the article, because like anybody who's ever written, you don't give up space. And I had about 300 words left. Our current hospital, Harris County Psychiatric Center, is partially owned by Harris County and partially owned by the University of Texas School of Health Sciences. So we're the only major urban area in Texas that does not have a state hospital, either in county or in a contiguous county. So I just threw in the line that, and it'd be a really good time, or a good idea rather, if we had our own state hospital to take some of the pressure off Harris County Psychiatric Center, which, because it's a teaching hospital, has to run through patients, say, every 3 weeks they should turn over, and the state hospital would provide them a place to do it. Well, my article caught the eye of powers that be in the medical establishment, and there was a corporation which is called the Texas Medical Center, which owns real property near hospitals and medical facilities, which they use for parking, which is an integral part of a medical center. And they happen to own a block-long parking lot right next to Harris County Psychiatric Center. So phone calls were made, and by the time we got into this past legislative session in 2017, they were willing to donate it for $1 a year. And then in return, the state would be able to build an annex to the existing hospital. And since they're right next to each other, it could do it. And I mean, that made what would have otherwise have been very difficult financially doable. So I was probably more than anything else just in the right place at the right time. But I'll take it.
Well, I think that's often the genesis of a really good story about a community, right? A concerned person puts out a message that's been carefully written. It's been carefully written, and then therefore people pay, kind of that extra little bit of attention to it. That extra little bit of attention means that somebody, looks at it and says, huh, and then things start to happen, right? How do you optimize your chances for any given thing to happen? You must have felt amazing when you heard that this was on its way.
I was absolutely amazed.
Wonderful, cool. Well, great story. I want to be able to let our group kind of kick in with their questions about anything related to the story of the development of that hospital or your experiences working in your particular judgeship and the kind of work you've been able to do for those with mental health issues. So I'm looking across our group and seeing if anybody is waving at me to start the questions over here. Sviatko, why don't you unmute and kick in?
Yeah, thanks for the story, Rory. So my question is about the initial process of what happens before someone with mental health issues is being helped. Are they normally the person who seeks out help, or is it people that are part of their community, part of their family? How does that normally play out?
Yeah, I deal with civil commitments, and obviously civil commitments involve people who are either a threat to themselves or a threat to others. So we're not talking about, probably 95% of the people walking around have some psychological issues. It's part of being alive. And, no, if you're just having the usual problems, most people, we're not involved. We're talking about people who either, like I said, are a threat to themselves or a threat to others. And generally, people are brought in by others, either family members, co-workers, or law enforcement. Now, theoretically, if you think you're losing it and you're familiar with the system, so you'd know what to do, you can just walk in the front door and go, hi, I am having visions, and I think I really need help. And they'll probably get you bed. But normally people come in against their will.
All right. Are there other questions from our group? Wave at me if you're ready with a comment or a question. All right, Benet, go right ahead.
Thank you. I had a question about substance abuse and whether or not that's part of, if it's often, one of the issues that the population is addressing, or if that's treated separately.
Most of the people that come into the hospital for treatment probably have a substance problem. If nothing else, they're self-medicating. And from what I've been told, there's a bias because the federal government pays for indigent patients, so the feds are much more inclined to shell out money if you're treating somebody for a mental illness who also happens to have a substance abuse problem. But most of the people that we deal with involuntarily self-medicate, so they will show up and they'll have signs of some controlled substance in their system as well as being mentally ill.
All right. Roger or Cecilia, do you have a comment or a question? Wave if you do. All right, Roger, why don't you unmute and join in?
Okay. First of all, I must say that I enjoyed the presentation, and thank you.
Thank you.
Each of the jurisdictions and the provinces and the in Canada and of each of the states in the United States have a different system of dealing with incapacity and mental health. In this province, I can say that my wife works for a group which is called Mental Health and Substance Abuse. And what she does is does the assessment of seniors for mental health issues in terms of Alzheimer's or various stages of dementia.
Sure.
And and one of the things that we've noticed here is that presently in her group, which is about 6 people in it, they presently have a waiting list of about 90 people. And that is for the city of Kamloops and the surrounding area. It is that aspect of mental health is a very growing area because of the bubble within our society dealt with the baby boomers. And we are getting the start of that group to come through the system. And in addition to that, what we're seeing is that things like dementia are starting to attack people at a much younger age. There seems to be correlation between substance abuse and mental health, but there also seems to, but on the other hand, it doesn't have to be one or the other. What you find here is that we have various different systems to deal with the nature and the type of the illness it is. If it is, let's say, a senior who is having problems, let's say, with dementia, then there's a team that comes along, and what they look at is assessment of that individual, and then the placement of that individual into a home or facility within our province to be able to care for them in the long term. And the emphasis, of course, is on trying to keep the people in their homes long term. However, going to another aspect of all of this, and there's a very, where the correlation between mental illness and substance abuse is very much, we've been having in this province is a spike in the deaths relating to overdoses within our province. And it's my understanding of looking at a lot of the societies, the states in the societies, is that you're having a lot of the same issues. The mental health aspect of that is huge. And what we've been finding is that we don't really know yet as to what's the best way of dealing with it. Because you're dealing with such issues as hopelessness within the community, despair, all of these types of issues which are extremely difficult to deal with. I would imagine our experience here in Kamloops is probably very similar to Judge's experience in
Texas
County. It's ever growing. It's consuming more and more people. The issues in relating to burnout for individuals, particularly in all walks of life, are becoming more and more greater and more prevalent because there's more pressure on individuals. They're working longer, they're taking shorter vacations, all of these types of things. And we're seeing that right across from every aspect of life, from the corporate world through to the professions, right down to the people working in various different occupations.
Roger, my friend, if you have a specific question for Rory, go ahead with that. I mean, I'd love to know, though. I did not know that about your wife's work. So,
right. Rory, can you tell us whether or not there's been we've talked about several things in terms of the seniors, of course, but also within mental health amongst people who are younger. But there seems to me to be a huge increase in as time goes on in terms of the mental health area. Would you agree with that from your county?
Yeah, to a point, but I don't have enough data to really answer the question. Reason being, if somebody is not mentally ill, let's say, but they're suffering from some, what our code refers to as organic brain syndrome, which could certainly include Alzheimer's or something else, we have the guardianship system, which of course goes back to the English centuries ago. And those are dealt with guardians. And the guardians, of course, can't lock people up unless if they go through a judge. When I was talking about mental health earlier, specifically, I was just dealing with people who suffer from what the DSM refers to as an Axis 1 diagnosis, which would be mood swing disorders, schizophrenia, and other forms of psychosis. So yeah, the two things are there, and sometimes obviously Alzheimer's can be fatal, but the public mental health system just deals with people who have Axis 1 diagnoses.
Hey, we've about reached that time for our recording, but Rory, what I'll do is I'll hand it back to you in a moment for a final thought to share with all of our members and guests. To all of those who have been watching, I want to thank you for taking part. It is a joy for us to be able to get a chance to talk to one of our own and to get to know each other a little better. Rory, that you are one of those people looking out for really some of the most vulnerable members of our society. I think that's how you judge a society, essentially based on how it treats its most vulnerable. And I thank you for the work you're doing. For those of you who've been watching, make sure to let us know you were here. If you'll scroll down just a little bit, there's a place to show that you've attended, and then there is at the bottom our Discuss, D-I-S-Q-U-S section, where you can leave a comment. And hopefully Rory will be able to respond to your comments if time allows during the week that this is the program. And we're excited always to have people come in and share ideas and to just join us in that celebration of the good work people are doing to make their communities better. So we'll finish with Rory and your final thoughts. Go right ahead.
Well, I'd like to say that from having gone to classes at the National Judicial College, I've had the opportunity to speak to judges from around the United States, and I seriously doubt it's different elsewhere. And basically, mental health, wherever you go, has a bit of a problem because legislators do not want to spend money on mental health because that's just not a politically sexy area, as opposed to public education, law enforcement, and things like that. And of course, they're all important. So I would suggest to anybody who sees this, talk to somebody involved with their local public mental health and see if there are problems getting adequate funding. And I suspect in most places that will be a problem. But thank you for asking me to speak. I've enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rory. And thank you all for being a part, and we will see you next week.